There we go. Hi, everybody. This is Debbie Hockman. I'm the Director of Arts, Culture, and Education at the David Posnack JCC, and thrilled as always to welcome you to our monthly book discussion with Lynda Levin, the lovely Lynda Levin. And this month we are reading, I really kept messing up this name, but it is Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi. I think I said that right, hopefully. But Lynda's going to lead the discussion there for today's book. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows the exciting news for the summer. We put it out there in our Culture Arts newsletter, and it's on our webpage. And I know our friends at the Sterling Road Library also are going to do the same, that this partnership program, which we love presenting with the Friends of the Sterling Road Library, is going to continue. So what we decided to do, and we're very happy about that, is that in the summer, Lynda, every book that Lynda does, you are going to get 2 chances to hear her. So one is going to be in person at the library on Tuesdays, the 3rd Tuesday of every month. And then the Zoom program will happen that same week, but Thursday. So Tuesday and Thursday of the 3rd week of each month is when we're going to review these books. It is the same book both days. So if you can't make the in-person and you can't make the Zoom, we will have a recording of the Zoom, and you can of course request that or wait till we put it on the Friends of Sterling Road Library's website. But either way, that's 3 chances. I'm giving you 3 chances to hear these books. Okay. No reason not to read any of these books. That's all I'm going to say. You have many ways. So if you're out of town, you can still see it. If you're in town, you have 2 choices. So really, everybody should be reading all summer long. So if you go on to the JCC website, the 3 books for the summer are listed, and I'm sure the lovely Jackie will also put it in our chat room for you today. But the 3 books and the dates for both the in-person and the online are listed. And you do need to register for the online so we can send you a Zoom link. As Leslie pointed out, sometimes it does go to, unfortunately, to the junk mail, and we're going to try to continue to work on that. And if you need more information about the in-person programs, we're going to ask you to call the library and they can give you more information about that. But I think you're going to get everything you need pretty much online. Anything to add to that?
Might be better that they don't see.
No, I think we're good. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to put everybody on mute, and then I will unmute. Let me put everybody on mute because the background noise, unfortunately, can be an issue. And what we ask for you guys to do is that in the end, when you want to be part of the conversation, that you are going to unmute yourself so that you can speak, or you can write it into the chat room and we will try to get to that. But we're going to put everybody on mute right now because sometimes you don't realize that the dog barking or somebody opening a door or going to the bathroom or any of those things that happen in the background of your house, that we all hear it. And so we just want to make you have the best experience you can. And with saying that, I know you're going to have the best experience because Lynda is leading this discussion, and there's lots to talk about in this book, which was not only beautifully written, but a very rich story. So really I'm going to turn it over to the lovely Lynda.
Great. Thank you. Good. All right, guys. So you know what's coming up in June, July, and August. And all 3 of those books, a lot of people have already read them, and everybody has been really, very positively responding. So I know you're going to enjoy those. Today's book, Sparks Like Stars, written by Nadia Hashim. So I have some background information I want to share about her. Let me first tell you a little bit about her bio. She is a pediatrician by training. She became a novelist, and she has written successfully 3 international best-selling novels. One was The Pearl That Broke Its Shell. A lot of people have read that, by the way, and really enjoyed it. When the Moon is Low, and the 3rd one is A House Without Windows. This was also interesting. She's a former Democratic congressional candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives for Maryland's 6th district. She lost that election resoundingly, but it's still interesting that she ran. You'll see that she's really quite an activist anyways, as I tell you a little bit more about her. She was born on December 12, 1977 to Afghan parents. Her parents immigrated to the United States in the early 70s. So keep in mind that the coup happened in 78, right? The story she writes about. Her parents left in the 70s. Her mother obtained a master's degree in civil engineering in Holland. So she comes from a very educated family. Her parents intended to return to Afghanistan. They had studied here for a while, but then after a few years, when they planned on going back, things were still unsafe. At that time, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan had started, and they remained in New York and became successful entrepreneurs. Nadia and her brother were raised in New Jersey and upstate New York. She attended Brandeis, and she got a degree in Middle Eastern Studies and another one in biology. She went on to get a medical degree from SUNY downstate and did all of her pediatric training at Bellevue Hospitals in New York City. What's interesting too is that during her time off, she began crafting stories that drew on her heritage and the complex experiences of Afghans. Sparks Like Stars is her fourth novel. It was published in 2021, and like her three previous novels, it too became an international bestseller. In one interview I listened to online, she told how this story came to be, and she says that she always wanted everyone to know that Afghanistan was not always this war-torn country, but rather when her parents lived there, it was in fact this beautiful place what she did is she wanted to explain to us in the beginning of the story the splendor of the palace, the beautiful gardens that existed throughout the country, the way it was back when her parents remembered it. But again, they left in the 70s, and they too did not go back until they went with her in 2003. That coup in 78 changed everything. She says she thought of her parents when that one character, Shair, says to the little child, Sitara, he says, "The Kabul you knew is gone." And it was true for her parents and everybody else. After that coup, all their privileged lives were over. So here we have this author who wants to describe Afghanistan as it once was, and then she sees an article in the paper about the remains of Mohammed Daoud Khan that were found 30 years later. And of course, this becomes the basis for her story. Because in this book, she gives us a lot of real history. Daoud Khan, who she calls Uncle Daoud in the story, was in fact the man who overthrew Afghanistan's monarchy and became the country's first president. Ironically, he was only the president for 5 years because then, after he assumed power 5 years later, the coup happened, and he and 17 members of his extended family were executed on the grounds of the presidential palace. And that really did happen. And though the coup occurred in 1978, in fact, their bodies were not found until 30 years later in 2008. The author tells us she did a lot of research. She used a lot of different websites. She had a lot of conversations and interviews with Foreign Service personnel. And so she uses the real history as a backdrop, and she came up with this fictional story of Sitara and her survival while the rest of her family perished. I want to give you a little more background about the author because she writes quite a bit in an extensive essay, which I'll share with you a little bit about that. But it puts in context where this author is coming from. She identifies very closely with her Afghan roots. She considers herself an activist. She grew up in the 80s, and she learned then how the U.S. was at that time helping the freedom fighters. And she says America might have had good intentions, although some say they were questionable. But she thinks it's important for all of us to realize how Afghanistan got into this terrible turmoil that it's in, and what was America's role in it all, and our responsibility going forward. She says, we're used to hearing one side of the narrative. The U.S. has a long history of friends becoming enemies and becoming friends again. So clearly what has been happening in Afghanistan now is very, very painful for her. Her husband was raised and schooled in Afghanistan. He left during the war years. Neither of them, her husband or herself, have much family living there, but she has very strong feelings as she watched the Americans withdraw recently from Afghanistan. So she writes this entire essay about her feelings, and you can read the essay online in its entirety. But basically, I'll sum up for you. She's reminding us that there have been 40 years of conflict in Afghanistan, which means that generations of Afghans carry with them some form of trauma or loss. Her parents left when they were in their 20s. They never saw a day of conflict. They only enjoyed the sweetness of their city. As an activist now, the author is involved with schools and lots of nonprofits that are trying to help the people that are still in Afghanistan. She says that the stories are terrible. The people are pleading for help to get their loved ones into America. And in this essay, she does a pretty good job of trying to dispel myths about Afghanistan, how it happened and why. She says she can't waste time arguing which US president screwed up the most. She says the answer is D, all of the above. She says, in the end of her essay, she says, quote, I surround myself with people who have focused on doing what we can for the people with whom we share a common troubled ancestry. But we share images of hope, not images of despair. So that's a little bit of context about the author and the kinds of books that she's writing. In terms of summary, if you remember, the setting now is Kabul. It is 1978, and we're going to meet Sitara Zamani. She's inside the ARG, which is the name of their palace, the presidential palace. And her father, you know, is this big-time advisor to the president. Her family resides in an apartment that is put aside for close family as well as advisors, and she lives a very privileged life. And then they have this state dinner party, and the Soviet diplomats and their tanks are hovering in the background. But the president has this lavish affair, and at that time, he reveals some archaeological treasures that were destined for Afghanistan's History Museum. And she's a little girl, Sitara, so she's 10 years old. She says to her father, I want to see the treasures up close. And she convinces her father to show her the secret place where, in the basement, the treasures are hidden. So that becomes a very important spot because her world is, as we know, shattered when the Soviet-backed rebels stage a coup and she witnesses the slaughter of her entire family. Sitara manages to hide in that secret compartment where the hidden treasures are stored, and she finally escapes with the help of a palace guard. His name is Shair. He smuggles her out. He takes her away from the palace. He leaves her with a female American diplomat, and with her, she takes one ring from that hidden treasure. The embassy official he takes her to is Antonia Shepard, and eventually, with her help, Sitara makes it to the United States. Of course, we know there's a little detour in a foster home, but eventually Antonia is able to finally adopt her, and so the child is raised in America. Come to 2008. We found Sitara. She's now an adult. She has a career as an oncological surgeon in New York City. She has changed her name to her sister. Remember the story? Her sister had died as an infant. She's got her birth certificate. She's taken on the name Ariana Shepard. And her past has become a distant memory. Of course, everything changes when all of a sudden the palace guard shows up in her office at the hospital, and he's the one who rescued her in 1978. Now he shows up as a cancer patient. He's an old, sick man, but his presence all of a sudden jolts her memory, and she is now it catalyzes a long suppressed desire to find out more about her family. And she's plagued by one nagging question, of course. Was the guard who saved her the same man who had in fact murdered her entire family, leaving her the sole survivor? So what we're going to see is her need to go back to Afghanistan and find some answers. And of course, we find that she does just that. So having told you a little bit of a bare bones summary there, I want us to move into our discussion part of today's talk and ask you what you thought of her style of writing. Did you enjoy her style of writing? Did you enjoy reading the book? Was it one of these books you really were anxious to know what was coming? Let's hear your reactions. What do you think of her style of writing?
Initially, I had a very, very hard time at the beginning of the book. I found her kind of all over the place, and I wasn't quite following. And because of the book club, thankfully, I held on, and then I really enjoyed the rest of the book. So
I'm so glad you did. Good,
yeah,
good.
so that was
Yeah.
great.
Good. Any other comments? Eva, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I enjoyed it from the beginning because I'm sorry, but
Wait, I'm sorry.
all
Oh,
across the
Eva, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
I'm
said
sorry. It's
same way. It
I'm
was
getting my
hard to get
voice
Oh, well,
back.
you know what? We've got two Evas speaking.
It
Okay,
it
that's
was
so
very
funny.
emotional for me because as a Holocaust survivor,
Oh,
um, it meant a great deal to me. And so I enjoyed it from the beginning, and I understood what she was going through, even though my own experience, my mother and I survived together. So my experience was not a camp survivor as a camp survivor, but I very much sympathize with Sitara.
thank you
I
for
lost,
sharing that.
I
Yeah.
lost other relatives and my grandmother, who I loved a lot. So, and to live in the shadows and always think not knowing what to be alive the next day marks a person and also my understanding of other people's situations. So I was very much with her all along.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So you could really identify closely. That speaks a lot to the ability of the writer to be able to describe that kind of experience.
I thought
Eva.
so, yes. Mhm.
I thought she was terrific at explaining and describing her trauma. She was just spot on. The book was hard to get into, but once it developed a rhythm, I couldn't put it down. And I was just in awe of how she could express herself. I also have a childhood survivor background, and some of that resonated always, but it was terrific. I'm going to look for her other books.
Yeah. The Pearl That Broke Its Shell is the one that I had heard so much about before reading this one. Yeah, I wondered how it seemed to me just reading it that she was, as you say, spot on as far as talking about the trauma. But obviously, hearing from both of our Evas, we see that she really was quite successful with that. Did you enjoy the poetry that she shares with her about her father? Yeah, Sarah, did you want to say something?
You had asked about the style of writing. I did enjoy it because there was a great deal of detail initially with the description of the coup and her fear, and then being taken, and then being taken in by Antonia. But what bothered me, quite honestly, is that the book is almost like two books. They skip her entire, once she's taken to America, we now fast forward, she's a doctor. Like, I'm more interested in her character development. How did this horrible experience impact her as she was adjusting to American life? There's no discussion of that at all. It's like she's a trauma victim. She makes her escape. And then all of a sudden she's a practicing doctor who has a boyfriend. I mean, I feel that we missed the entire essence of her adjustment to life in America and what it was like as a post-trauma.
Interesting. Jillian, yeah?
Yes, hi. Also, same like what Sarah just said. I'm glad that they, the foster home scene was very short.
That was painful.
So it was painful, and I'm glad she didn't stay with that much longer than that. But also, it didn't really explain how she just showed up one day. The Antonia just showed up by the window, and it was that was very rushed. That scene about her picking the reuniting of them, and then fast forward that she's a doctor. Like when she first become I kind of wished there was a little bit of a, she went to school, graduate school, medical, like something to tie it in together.
I think the book was all about trauma, not about her personal.
I agree.
Yeah.
It was all about how she dealt with the trauma, how she lived with the trauma, and how she had to try to let go of the trauma. I don't think that we needed to know her personal story for 10, 12 years to, I wasn't missing that.
Except when she comes to America, that's how she deals with the trauma. And we don't get any of that. So we don't really get how she deals with the trauma at all, quite honestly.
We do get it because
Well,
she doesn't deal
she deals with it every day. She shoves
Yes,
it down
yes,
her
yes.
throat.
So we'll
gets
talk
up
a
and
little
goes
bit
to
about
work.
that. We'll talk a little bit about that. But as far as her growing up years, really, I hadn't really stopped to think about what the point you're making, but it's a very good point. What she does is she tries to sum it up in a couple of paragraphs, honestly, when she says that she had a difficult childhood, that Antonia was really perseverant, that she stuck with it. In fact, there was one line when how difficult it was that a lot of nights she had to spend a lot of time, Antonia, plucking thorns out of her because she had so many little things that bothered her, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it was like for her, how she, what the lasting effects of this trauma were. But she doesn't really talk about it except that it was a difficult childhood. Stephanie, yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing. I do think you get several times, I put this in the chat, she is so hypervigilant. And you see that whenever she's put into a new situation, she's scoping out where the exits are.
Yes.
So even as an adult, I think you get, to me, that's really, portrays the trauma so well. And you're right. I don't disagree with Sarah that, in fact, it does fast forward. We do fast forward. But I think she doesn't let go of the fact that, she's very hypervigilant in every situation she goes into. And that doesn't go away.
Yeah.
I wanted to
an
say,
author
Kathy?
has to.
Yeah, Kathy, did you have something?
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes, I found, other than, of course, the Coup, which was terribly difficult to read, I had a really rough time with the foster home because I worked in foster care and adoption for a lot of my career in New York. And it was really tough. And when she was at that window, I thought, oh my God, what is going to happen? And then I turned the page, and quite honestly, I was really relieved that
I was too.
it jumped ahead. I thought, this child has had so much trauma in her life. I didn't need any more description of it. I got it. As much as I could, not having experienced anything close to that. But I felt that the author made it abundantly clear and graphically clear. And I agree with Eva, because she had that the rest of her life. It was never resolved. It was never resolved. And her fortitude and her ability to endure was just extraordinary.
So Kathy, following up on that, what would you say, what qualities did, even as a child, what qualities did Sitara have? What was it in her personality or her life experience that enabled her as a child to survive?
Well, one thing, believe it or not, was a sense of humor.
Oh,
She was able to see quirky things in people. She took nothing for granted. I think she had a tremendous perception of people. Well beyond her years. And she was a survivor. And she was absolutely going to survive this.
she was a survivor. It was almost like inherent in her, a certain amount of that. What else? Yeah, Marilyn?
I agree with what everybody said as to her survival skills and what made her do all of the things that she did to succeed. I think her inner drive was so strong. But what the author then showed, I guess, towards the end, was by doing that, she sheltered herself so much. She shared nothing of herself. She wasn't able to have a life of love. She wasn't able to have a life of compassion. I think all of that trauma, because it was never dealt with, hindered her and paralyzed her future as a person that way. That's what I think.
Yeah,
Can I say something?
yeah, Leslie.
Yeah, I think, you know, an author has to make a choice, you know, how much I'm going to include, how much I'm going to tell. And I think by leaving out the things that people were complaining about, it was like her choice to say that the Ariana couldn't deal with certain things and she wouldn't tell. You know, she had to keep her story inside. She couldn't even tell Adam, even though she kept wanting to. And maybe the fact that she chose not to tell certain things added to the fact that she was so traumatized as she was going along. And so I felt that as I was reading that, and I wasn't bothered at all when it went 30 years ahead. I said, good, you know, I don't want to have to deal with what happened in between. And yeah, and I do wonder though about that scene with the foster parents. I mean, it seems that she was sexually abused, but it never does come out. But I don't guess that's not that important to the story, but I think the author made wonderful choices, and the trauma, you just felt it so much. When I started reading the book, I didn't think I would really be interested in the topic, and I just got so swept up in it. Her style of just creating a story of such suspense and excitement, as well as the inner development of the character, was, I think, amazing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're right. I was taken with Sitara, with the influence that her parents had on her at such an early age, at 10 years old, how she kept reflecting back and she drew such strength on her father's memories, right? The poetry that her father, the songs that he sang to her. She remembers her father telling her stories that she reminded him of Malali, a fierce warrior, how her father said that an Afghan secret weapon has always been their women. And he tells Sitara, by the way, I love this expression, you are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. I mean, he gave her such messages as a child, and she has these wonderful, wonderful memories of them. And her parents gave her a very strong will to live. There were a lot of things that she was very skilled as a kid. She was very quick thinking. Remember when she was walking, they're trying to get back into her house. They're still in Kabul. She's with Antonia, and they're trying to get back into her house. And they see a friend of her father. Actually, he's a general. He was one of the generals, and he is now walking. He's now working with the new government, living in her house, her parents' house. And as she comes by, some other soldier says, like, what are you doing here? And Antonia and she are standing in the street, and she thinks quickly and she says, oh, this is my mother. She's a midwife. And that's why we're walking, you know. I know we're coming from a job, and she's just a very quick thinking kid. Anything else you want to speak about her in terms of her personality, those kinds of inherent skills that she had? How about the fact that she was caught in that Pakistan's embassy bombing? I thought that was amazing, that she was so physically agile that she was able to crawl up there and figure out how to open up the vault so that they could all get out. And, you know, I thought that was pretty clever how the author brings that whole thing in. It was so much a part of history. How focused she was. Part of her whole thing about studying and becoming a doctor, it was a way of focusing on everything except her past. So she really submerged herself into her studies, and of course is successful. So why was the ring so important to her? Why was having that ring? Why did she take it?
Well, that was a connection to the past.
Definitely.
When you are a trauma survivor, sometimes you need to hold on to something so that you can believe that it really happens.
Yeah, it was not only a connection, it was a connection to the country's past and to her
Right.
past. Yeah,
Right.
It was one of the last things her father had shown her. Anything else? She says in here that she was stunned even as a kid by the idea that the ring was able to outlive anyone who had ever worn it. The whole idea that people don't understand, her father tells her that people don't want to believe that civilizations will not endure forever. So the ring really later on even takes more and more of a meaning. It says here, the ring had become a talisman for me, she says, a key to my survival. It was the color of the carpet upon which I'd read stories, the color of my father's wool sweater, the color of pooled blood. I had the ancient world wrapped around my finger, even as the modern world I lay in curled its cruel fingers tighter around my throat. Yeah, Jackie?
I was going to say, I think the ring also was the only real constant thing in her life besides her pain, because I actually disagree. I don't think she was developed through this story at all. I think she remained stuck in that pain until towards the very end, but the ring was a constant for her.
Yeah. She does say that that ring was her constant. It prevented her from feeling untethered, vulnerable to any rogue wind. So it really was something that she was able to hold on to. So then the big question is, why do you think Shair saves Sitara?
Well, her mother was kind to him. He points that
Yes.
out. And I think he recognized that the family were good. They were good people.
Good
And
people.
And he told the soldier who was going to bury them to make sure that he did a good job.
Right.
Did it well.
Yeah. She makes a point of saying her mother was never aloof from the people who worked in the palace, and her mother used to give clothing that was very meaningful. She gave her the hand-me-downs to Shair's children. Remember, and when she goes to their apartment afterwards, when
She doesn't
Shair
like
brings her
seeing
there,
it.
she sees the kids wearing the clothing. Yeah, so it's very poignant in that way. Any other ideas of why he might have saved her? Okay, so do you think he was a good guy that he saved her?
You think maybe he felt guilty?
That's
for
what I
he
was thinking.
doing?
I thought maybe he felt a lot of guilt and he was able to save her. Yeah.
I think he was in a situation. There were people who were above him, who were forcing him to do something. I see people probably do that all the time, and that they're not intrinsically bad. It's just that they're afraid. They don't stand up. We know history so well.
Yeah. At one time, he even used the line, I was following orders.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
One thing that mystified me a bit was the fact that, yes, I also felt he was driven by guilt. But once in the apartment, she was really mistreated by him. And I mean, they fed her and they clothed her, but they just totally really didn't want to have anything to do with her. They excluded her from their lives. And that troubled me. I mean, well, in a way, it seemed consistent, but in a way, it didn't. I mean, if he rescued her, why didn't he treat her more decently?
Any thoughts on that? Yes, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, it almost made me think of some SS men who were following orders and didn't even think, as they were following orders, what was morally right and what was morally wrong. But when he saw her, and I think it triggered in him a memory of her mother and her kindness, it kind of shows us but the two sides of human nature, that we can be very, very evil, and at the same time, we can be very kind. So even the Nazis were kind to their children, I assume. So he was in this dilemma, and I think when he saw her as this little kid hiding, that just tapped into the devastation that he knew he had caused by everyone else, and that perhaps it tapped into whatever morals he did have, and I think that he might have felt guilty his entire life until he saw her again.
But you know what? Yeah, I think that's true. It's interesting. That's two sides of the human nature. And at one point, but getting back to Kathy's point, I was thinking about how he treated her in that apartment. But remember, his wife was so angry. Everybody was afraid of getting thrown into jail if you were at all supportive of the president. So here he brings into their house the kid, and she's angry and scared. And all she wants is to get rid of this child. And he doesn't know what to do with the kid, right? He really doesn't know he throws it. Because when you think about it, he really did go out of his way. It's one thing to just save her, put her in the basement and forget about her. But he takes her to the apartment. And ultimately, he brings her to Antonia, right?
Right. Right.
So I thought that was interesting, but I think it was a very complicated feeling that he had, because I think he was also motivated by a lot of fear. Once he saved her, he was really scared what to do with her. Was
But
another
do you
question.
really think that he killed the parents? Because at the end, or toward the end, he says, I never would kill your mother or your brother, and I didn't kill your father either. I felt truth when he said that.
Yeah. So we can talk a little bit about that. But even before we get there, I want to ask you this. Why is she, though, so angry at Shair? He has saved her. Why is she angry?
She thinks he killed.
Go ahead. Yeah, Leslie.
Yeah, she thinks he killed her.
Yeah.
She does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Marilyn. Yeah.
I think
Marilyn,
she
you
might
want to?
have survivor guilt feelings.
Yeah.
I think she's sorry that he left her alive. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
I do.
And I think he's a focus too. He's the only focus when you think about it. And I think that it's kind of like, when you hit your thumb with the hammer, the first thing you do is you want to yell at somebody standing next to you. And I think that's it.
It's exactly, that was she put all her energies into really hating him. And right, exactly.
But
And
Lynda,
allowed her not to-
wasn't it also the friend, I don't know how to say his name, Rostrom? The son meet her
That's a lie.
friend's brother when
Yeah.
they discover each other again. He too, somebody looked, I mean, he could have been killed as well, but wasn't.
Right.
And the same thing, except his experience was, they threw him in the jail. But I'm saying to you, but I think that also was a choice that Shair made. So I think it was so complicated with that part, with the fact that these guys all of a sudden turned and but they still had feelings for these kids.
Yeah. Well, I thought that story, because Rostam also was saved by other soldiers and he doesn't understand why they took him to the hospital. So that gets back to Sarah's point of there is a drop of moral code, which sometimes kicks in, Yeah. By the way, I think the author included that story about Rostam also because she wanted us to see that historical truth, which was some people were not killed. They were taken to the prison and they were later, I found that interesting. I didn't know about you, but I didn't know this, how the Shah of Iran saved some of them. So that was an interesting piece of history. I think she wanted us to learn that as well. Okay, I want to talk a lot about, I found the two women so interesting. And then I do want to talk to get back to Leslie's question about Shair, because I think that's a lengthy conversation as well. But let's talk a little bit about Antonia and her mother, Tilly. I love that combo. Let's talk about Antonia first. So what adjectives describe her? How do we describe her?
Conscientious.
What?
Conscientious in her work.
Conscientious, yes, very important at her
Focus.
work. Trusted at her work. What else?
I think she was really conflicted.
Conflicted.
A
How?
woman with fortitude.
Fortitude.
Courageous.
Courageous. Yes, all of these things. I found her practical, cautious. She's a realist. She knows this kid was a witness to what happened in the palace. They've got to get her safe, right? What else?
Compassionate.
Compassionate. So what added to the fact that she's like a good person?
She was full of fortitude.
Fortitude, absolutely. But she has a certain empathy for Sitara. Do you remember why there might have been another additional reason why she had additional empathy? What does Tilly later share with her about Antonia's past? That her father, she had lost her father, that her father had died, and Tilly wasn't around at that time to comfort her. So she was really alone when her father died. So Tilly says to her, I think that she's really empathizing with you for that reason as well. What else do we want to say about Antonia?
Well, there's some conflict between her and her mother, and I find that very interesting because that can happen between mothers and daughters. But she loves her, but she is still angry at things that happened where Tilly wasn't there for her when she was younger.
So Antonia was absolutely, and they were polar opposites. Antonia was so afraid of making a mistake in saving her, how to do it in process, that she was almost paralyzed, right? So then we've got Tilly, and thank goodness for Tilly, because they were a winning combination, those two. Tilly is the opposite. Well, how do we describe Tilly? What are the adjectives for her? Instead of practical, cautious, all of those, what do we say about Tilly?
Cookie.
Quirky.
Free spirit.
Free spirit, yeah.
Very lucky.
Impetuous.
Carefree.
What?
Carefree.
Carefree.
Lonely.
Not
Lonely.
sensible.
She loved that girl.
It was
She
maternal.
Love
It was
that girl. I love this description that the author says that she, first of all, we know Tilly was so loving, wasn't she, right away? And there's one where she embraces Sitara in the apartment when they first meet, and she says to her, you know, it's kismet. It's fate that brought us together with you, she says. And then she says, and the author writes, Tilly pulled her close, quote, and then Antonia's, Sitara's describing, quote, we rock together as a predestined pairing, like two lines of a couplet, like two edges of a jagged wound, like a lost mother and a found child.
Yes.
So it's really quite beautiful, isn't it? You can just picture that scene.
I saw Tilly very much as the real savior. That if there hadn't been Tilly, I don't know that there would have been a rest of the story.
Yeah.
Because her unconditional, her love, and she did something for the child that I don't think anybody else did, even Antonia.
Right. She not only provided for her physical safety by sending her very impetuously with those hippies, right? They get into that van, which Antonia would have said absolutely not, and did say absolutely not until he overrode it and just did it. But you're right, Stephanie. She provided a certain that love that was so missing and so necessary for a child. The love, the comfort. Yeah. Jillian, yeah.
So I think Tilly did it because she felt guilty with the way she raised Antonia, that she was always traveling or always, I mean, that's what I got, like that sense that she was never around. And she
was
felt
never around.
guilty,
I
and she
think
wanted to make up for it. So
that's right. She called herself a roller coaster parent. She was never around. She was theatrical. She loved the stage, right? She was always out. She was always gone. And following up on your thought, Jillian, I thought it was almost like she was trying to make up for her absence during Antonia's childhood, and she ended up giving the care, love, and devotion that she didn't give to Antonia, and she ends up giving it to Sitara, right, at that point. So it's interesting, yeah. What else about Tilly? Any other thoughts? Eva, did you have something? Eva, did you have something? No.
That hand isn't real. I don't know what it's.
What?
But she was fun-loving.
I'm sorry, Eva, I'm not understanding.
Tilly was fun-loving.
Fun-loving, so fun-loving.
That was her number one lodestar.
Yeah, right, right.
No matter what was going on around her, she stayed fun-loving. That's why she was drawn to the hippies.
That's right. That's how she met the hippie couple in the first place, right? But the other thing about Tilly, we know that she was diagnosed with cancer before she comes to Afghanistan, and yet she is very physically strong. She's very brave, first of all. But the fact that she's able to sustain the van crash, the assault in Pakistan, and finally, of course, we know she passes away on the plane, which is very tragic coming to the United States. But nonetheless, we see how physically strong she was. So I want to get back to talking a little bit about ways that Sitara, who takes on the name Ariana, how did that childhood affect her later life? So we've talked about a number of things, right? We said how she's always looking at hotel maps to see where's the exit, how to get out. I think, Stephanie, you may have brought that up. A lot of you have brought up different things. She could not share her past with a therapist. She's only happy when she's running, right? It was the one thing that gave her release. And so many things that happened in her life they were triggers. And it brought on these unbelievable anxiety attacks. Do you remember some of these triggers for her? Well, she sees a movie about the Romanovs. Remember that?
Right.
When she's a kid. And she just really freaks out and has to come home because she realized how Anastasia really mirrors her life.
She talks about
what else were triggers for her.
She talks about her migraines all the time. I was getting them just listening to her.
Yes, it's true.
Isn't that what sparks like stars are? Was the preamble to a migraine?
Could be.
You know, that's interesting because there were so many ways I was trying to figure out how the title came to be. And I hadn't thought of that one, but you're absolutely right. That would be absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But she was fascinated with the stars.
Totally fascinated with the stars.
Part of her.
Yeah, even as a child, matching up the constellations in the book to the actual ones in the sky. Yeah.
Also, her name, Sitara, means star.
Meant star, exactly. Remember when she goes to the, by the way, you forgot one of the most important ones, one of the biggest problems that she had as an adult. She couldn't even join a book club. Do you remember that? Do you remember that line in there? Why
Yes.
couldn't she join the book club? Oh, guys, I thought for sure you would catch that line. Because in a book club, remember, she never talks about her past. She never talks about her life. And in a book club, what happens a lot of times?
People relate.
End up sharing something about your life. And she would never share. So she never wanted to go to a book club because she didn't want to share anything. But also she was always so, there were so many things. She would buy clothes that reminded of her mother, the way her mother used to dress. There were so many ways in which she was affected. One of the most important things was she didn't think she ever wanted to get married, have children, because she was afraid of being vulnerable, the idea of losing a child, losing anybody again. Mm-hmm. She goes to the fortune teller with her friend, takes her to the fortune teller, and the fortune teller gets a little bit close. And what happens? Full-blown anxiety attack. She goes running out. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the other thing clearly is she becomes a cancer surgeon. So why do you think a child like this would choose as an adult a career like that?
Maybe it had something to do with Tilly's illness.
Oh, interesting. Maybe. Judy, did you have something?
That's what I thought.
Judy, unmute. Unmute yourself, Judy.
She wanted to help a large variety of people. And in this way, whether it was children or adults, you know, she would find the help through them that she was helping them.
She was helping them. Yeah. The idea of doing that.
Yeah.
What about
those people she could save, that she would have a chance of saving them if she was a surgeon.
Yeah.
I found it very interesting that she had the sense that she could smell. She could smell.
Yes.
And with it, you know, that to me also is it's almost like one of those dogs, those cancer dogs.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's certain things almost like a destiny thing for her.
A destiny thing for her. And also I felt like she talks a lot about different patients and the grieving that she witnesses. I think it was a way of her working out her own grief.
Yeah.
If you remember, one of the chapters begins where the TV is on in the doctor's lounge, and there's an interview with a musician who obviously has gone through a traumatic episode. And they say to him, well, how did you ever get over it? And he goes, oh, I started a nonprofit. And I almost felt like they were telling you that because this was sort of a way, when we talk about how did her childhood impact on her, this was one of the ways that she did it, was just dealing with people and witnessing their grief and trying to help them through their grief. The other thing that she makes a very interesting point, she says, only in the operating room Does she have the ability to focus all of her attention in a single direction? Anywhere else, her thoughts are restless and fleeting. Interesting, huh?
Well, that's a good thing
Yeah.
for her patients.
Yes.
It's a good thing for patients, exactly. And it was a good thing for her because it gave her temporary
Win-win.
respite
That's
from
a good
all
thing.
of her other thoughts. Exactly. So I want to talk about her relationship now with Adam. What went wrong and why was he the wrong guy? Well, first of all,
I think she was afraid to share her past.
she wouldn't share her past, absolutely wouldn't. And I think part of it was there's a line in there, she says, to be around him is to have a taste of a life that always seemed beyond reach, a life propelled by the future, not dragged by the past. They were different people, right?
Right.
Yeah,
He
she
used
talked
her.
about the
He
fact
was
that all
using
of
her.
his friends looked like him and all of
All
his
his friends
girlfriends
look like him.
and not like her,
Yeah.
that she was
Right,
different.
exactly.
It was
And
so
one more
obvious.
thing, he was very selfish.
He was very selfish. We know he was selfish.
And she
Right.
realized he was using things that were holy and secret to her, some of her patients and things of that nature.
The fact that he breached her trust, right?
Yes,
And he goes
yes.
ahead and he posts about her patient was amazing, right?
Yeah.
So he does that. He wants a list of her colleagues for fundraising. And as you started to say, could you think of anything worse for someone who's trying to hide their past? He's now going into politics. I love this line.
Not only that, but he used everything he could use. He was using her.
He was,
And she realized that.
She realizes it's all for strategies, right?
Right. She would have been a good political wife on paper. And that's what he really was interested in.
He didn't really care. And he says to her at one point, do you have any skeletons in the closet? She doesn't answer him.
Right.
Sort of a big one. Yeah.
That is really ironic when you think about it. All her skeletons are in the closet, her parents.
That's right.
Yes.
Really. So now picture this scene. Shire shows up in her office. What's her response when she sees him?
Shock.
What's her response?
Shock.
Shock.
Shock. What else?
Anger.
Anger. Tremendous anger.
And resolve to get back at him.
Resolve. She doesn't know. Does she want revenge? What does she want? And she, she goes to his apartment building. Wasn't that amazing? She's like driven after she sees him. She's all of a sudden, it just catapults her back into the past. And she goes to his apartment and she's very clear. She doesn't want to be his redemption. That's for sure. She's very angry. And when she goes there, he takes her to the cemetery. Now, why does he do that? Why does he take her to see where his son is buried?
He has lost too.
He has been showing her. He has experienced loss, Jillian.
Yeah.
Jillian, did you have something to add?
I would say he lost someone he loved, and he can feel kind of what her pain was to lose a loved one. Not the
That's
same
right.
level, but that it took for him to lose to really understand where she was coming from.
Right. And he
She
says,
also-
okay.
She also was hoping he could help her to find out where her family was buried.
Yeah.
I don't think he realizes it then yet that I don't know. He knows that he can be helpful. Of course, we know he will end up being helpful. But I thought when his answers to her, when she asks him, and he says to her at one line, when they're at the cemetery, what can I say to free you? And she says, did you kill them? And he said, you would be surprised by how many fingers can fit on one trigger. I thought that was a really important line.
Right.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll come back to it. But anyhow, so she has this conversation with Shire. And what does it makes, how does she feel afterwards? Well, the first thing she feels, I thought, was she feels that he makes her feel the worst version of herself. She resents him because of the way it makes her feel. But what does that conversation do for her? What does it do for her? She's
She
asking
wants-
him all these questions. Yeah.
She wants more.
She wants more. It's giving her an understanding of what happened that night. She has courage to face her past. Shair tells her he didn't kill her parents, but he tells her about the soldier that did report that he did bury them. And so that's at least a clue for her. And of course, I think the words that really are important here is that the conversation that he has with her about the seven heavens as they stood over his son's grave. And she realizes the garden that they were in was constructed. He talks about heaven and the idea that gardens that are constructed in the image of the gardens of paradise.
Paradise.
Being buried among the giants, right? Among the giant trees. All of these later on are going to be very, and she realizes that he chose to bury his son in a place that was peaceful with evergreens and flowers. And of course, later on, that's all going to play very important for her.
Also, when he first sees her, he is very happy to see her. He says, "Oh, you're the girl." And he's proud of her. When someone suggests that she's a nurse, he corrects her, says, "No, she's a doctor." You know, it's like his child. You know?
And he's taking pride in that.
Yes.
But I think that you're right. And she can't stand it, right? That he's thinking that she doesn't want to be his redemption. She certainly doesn't want that.
Right.
Also, Lynda, I think when there is some part of her that has relief that she finally found him. And now she can figure out what to do. But now they've found each other.
Without realizing it, she really did need him to catapult her back, because up till then she had sort of literally buried her own feelings.
Right.
And now everything was going to be able to come out and ultimately be resolved.
Lynda, sorry.
Yeah.
I also think that the anger, I mean, we all know this, it held her captive as well for all these years, that she focused that anger on him. And in a sense, she needs to let that go to move on to the next part of her life, to be able to be different in her relationships.
Yeah.
And
sort of that released her, right?
I think so. So as much as she didn't want to give him redemption, he gave her something.
He gave her something. And when he says to her, I didn't kill I could never have harmed your mother or your brother. I wasn't the one who killed your father. None of your family was supposed to be there. But he knows that doesn't absolve him. So, do you all believe that he did not kill her parents? And yet, he is feeling tremendous guilt, don't you think?
Yeah.
Which is why that line is there. I think that line we just heard, you know, you'd be surprised how many fingers can fit on a trigger.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea of, and I think that
he may not have done it, but he knew who did.
But he knew he was part of it. He knew he was part of it. And at one point he says, "What man can stop a river? This is God's river. I'm nothing. God is God. I never expected to escape this. I never did." So in other words, he realizes that he was part of something really terrible, but yet he couldn't stop it, or he didn't even try to stop it. So she ends up, because of him, it causes her to go back to Kabul. And of course, how does that affect her when she goes back to Kabul?
Well, she finds Clay.
Well, she finds Clay. We're going to talk about him, that's for sure. Okay. But she goes back to Kabul, and she's trying to resolve a lot of issues. And of course, the main issue, what's she going for? Why is she going there? She doesn't know herself, by the way, in the beginning.
Closure.
She's going for closure. Exactly. That's what she needs.
Yeah.
What else?
To find the remains of her parents.
To find the remains of her parents. It's so important to her. And when she goes to Kabul and she sees this modern city, I love the idea that there's an internet cafe that shares a wall with a mosque. You know, she describes that. Okay. She talks a lot about, and again, you can see the author's point in trying to teach us a lot here, because she's showing her the homes riddled with bullets. They go to an organization for mine clearance and Afghan rehabilitation. Remember that little tour they take? She sees women in burqas. She goes, but she keeps hearing her father's voice once again. But most of all, the important thing is she really wants to find these bodies. And she comes to realize that Shire was right in a way. Kabul was no longer her home in a literal way, but it would always be a part of her. So she needed that closure. So she learns a lot in terms of facing her memories. And what does she actually come to realize? What does she come to realize finally at the very end here?
They wanted her to survive.
That they gave her that will to survive, that it was meaningful to her parents, it was important, and what else? She comes to realize
that they approved of her survival.
I'm sorry, Eva, you say that again?
I say they still loved her family and they approved of her survival.
That's right.
That's something right. She was worried about.
That she shouldn't have guilt. She should not have guilt about her survival. It was something they would have wanted. And she realizes that she had stopped thinking about her family for fear, quote, of spiraling into a grief from which she could never climb out of. And I love the fact that Antonia says to her at one point, you know, we are so damned afraid that talking about the ones we've lost will hurt us as much as losing them did. So we just stop talking about them. And she realizes she's really just buried all of this grief and never really come to terms with it.
What did she say?
Of course, I want to talk a little bit about Clay and his role in the story. So, why does it seem that Clay is an important character in this story and important to her? Well, why? What's his role in the story?
He's a journalist.
Jackie, he's a journalist. What else?
Well, I think the thing with Clay is that he won't take no for an answer. My personal, I really didn't much care for her because even though it was a horrendous thing and it happened to her when she was a little girl, so it's easy to say how you would feel, she pushed everybody away, but she couldn't push him away because he was the reporter and he was digging for the story.
Okay.
And I think she needed that.
Right. And what else about him digging for the story? Kathy, yeah.
I agree with that. But also he had insights that nobody else had in her life. He got it as much as anybody could.
He had known Afghanistan before the war, right? Yeah, exactly. Right. He really kind of knew it. He knew the history and he could identify, as opposed to Adam, who had no past, did not know anything. And all of a sudden, here's a guy who really can empathize with what she's been through.
But he's also compassionate toward her. And he says, that's your story. I'm not going to tell your story. I'm going to tell the story that I need to tell.
And by the way, how diametrically opposed to Adam, who goes ahead and posts her personal stories. And this guy says, I would never write anything that's going to be even remotely close to you. I'll only write about the treasure or whatever else. I'm not going to write anything about you. Yeah. Anything else about Clay? Yeah.
I just want to ask, what happened to the treasure that was buried in the basement? Did they find those things beside the ring?
So I think when they go to the museum, they find very few things, but they do have some things. We don't know what happened to that. I don't think she really talks about that. Of course, she returns the ring, and that, of course, is the full closure for her, the importance of giving that ring back.
I keep thinking that she's going to tell them, go to the basement and you'll find all those treasures.
That's in the next book.
The next book.
That's
right.
the next book, exactly. But I thought that,
Lynda, how old was Clay, though? That's what I couldn't get from, at one point I thought maybe Clay and Antonia would develop a relationship because I thought he was older. Like when she found out that Celine or whatever the person was his agent or publicist and not his girlfriend.
Oh, that's so interesting. I never thought of him being older for Antonia. I always thought of him as being the potential love interest for her. But you're right, it could have been that. We don't really know.
He knew Afghanistan from before, and he wrote about it. So like he must have been much older than her. That's what I was like. I kept thinking he had to be older. to know
Yeah.
and write about it from beforehand.
But I didn't read it that way. I read it that he did his like he went to Afghanistan, spent time now, but I don't think he actually lived it. I never read it that way, that he was there before. I read it that
But
he
knew the history.
He knew the history, but
Right.
not that he
Right.
was there in 1978, but
Right.
that he, because he went and saw it, that he then did the deep dive into it. That's how I read it.
Right.
But
And
I never
right,
thought that there was,
that he hadn't lived it, but rather that
Yeah.
he had researched it, and he came across some artifacts himself from that.
and I think it was
home
because
or
of that
whatever.
connection, which is why
Yeah.
she was like, okay to talk to him, but not.
Yeah, she also liked that he traveled all over, just like she had with Antonia. Like they had that in common. Like they, you know, and he knew where she came from, basically. Where with Adam, it was kind of like, I didn't see that relationship at all.
No,
You know,
nothing. There was nothing similar, nothing. And obviously they never, the fact that they lived in separate boroughs and never tried to even get it together in that whole year of dating that they were together. Exactly. I want to just tell you something also about the returning the ring, which I think is interesting. Okay, so the one person who should mute themselves is me because my phone is ringing. Okay.
Call from
Okay. Let me just figure out how to hang this up. Okay. It says here, I love this line. When she goes back to the museum, the curator says, regimes come and go. It's the things that we create, the bowls, the hairpins, the rings, they stay and tell our story. And I thought that's really true. You know, when we find artifacts, it's the only way we know about a lot of these long buried civilization. And he says to the doctor, he says, let's see. Okay. Oh no, here it is. The curator says, he says to Satan, he says to her, you surely did not dig this ring out of the earth yourself. And she thinks about how she'd held onto the ring like a life preserver and answers, it was the other way around. I really like that little twist in there, right? That it really was the one that saved her. Okay. I do want to ask you about, just real quickly as before we end, you can really see where the author makes some political points in here, right? She wants us to know a lot about the history. What did you learn about that? What political points do you think she's making in here?
Do I need that? Or do we need...
She made a couple of points. One was the CIA was involved in things that we didn't know about. And I think she also made the statement about third world countries, that there's the first world country was the United States, second world country was the Soviet Union, and the third world country was the countries that they fought over and ruined in the process.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, she suggested at the end of the book, which I'm going to listen to, a book called Ghost Wars, which is about CIA involvement in Afghanistan. So that should prove to be interesting.
Right. So you can tell that the author has a lot of conflicted feelings about America's role in there. And she has that little debate going on. Do you remember between Clay and Antonia? As quote, as officers of the U.S. Foreign Service, our mission was to build diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Afghanistan. Diplomatic relations with Afghanistan were one tactic in the Cold War strategy. The Russians and the Americans were trying to both be best buddies with Afghanistan. They were two muscle-flexing superpowers playing tug of war, and they shredded this country to pieces. Yeah. So it's very interesting, you know, the political overtones in here. And of course, Antonia answers, listen, it was the Russians who masterminded the coup. They poured millions into the country. They made sure the people were grateful. The coup was Russian orchestrated. It was a prelude to the military invasion of the country, the beginning of the end. So you can see where Antonia is taking the United States defense thing in there. So I thought it was interesting because what I do love about historical fiction is how we learn things as well. Marilyn? Yeah.
As a culture, there are many, I can remember reading The Kite Runner, who all brought back the the memory that before politics got involved, life in Afghanistan was really very pleasant and very lovely, and war and politics played a horrible role in that book, showing that, and in this one, and I'm sure there are many others. This is just the one that came to mind. And it's a pity that that all this happened.
Right. So it's timely reading this when you think of what's going on there now and how things just have deteriorated so for them. Anything else anyone wants to talk about this book? I thought there were a lot of very poignant scenes in here. Not only the coup, but the embassy bombing in there. And I thought also, as we all mentioned, that whole very brief scene about foster care was very, very painfully poignant. I think the author did a really fine job of making the points that she wanted to make.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the foster care probably is like that today too.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah. But it's, she's calling the attention and thinking that maybe someone could do something to change it if she wrote about it and her experience.
But I have to say, there are, in my experience, there have been some marvelous foster families too, and adoptive families. But yes, it's terrible what can happen.
I just want to remark about the fact that at the end, she's wearing her mother's necklace and she has her father's watch on her desk. And I thought that was a nice touch, that she could have something of her parents with her.
Yeah, that she was able to have that kind of closure. Yeah, and that was so important to her.
That was kind of a strange scene where they were digging. I just can't quite imagine that going on, but it was interesting.
Digging, the idea of finding the graves among the trees. Yeah.
That was a result of this guy doing the description that.
Yeah. So in the end, it's interesting. In the end, when you think about it that way, now that you've just said what you just said, Shair saved her physically. And at the end, he actually saves her emotionally as well. Yes. Because he's able to provide that closure for her. At the end.
There was a comment in the, I don't know if you had seen it in the chat, about the title. And the comment was, the title's explained at the end. It's from a reference by a female author that died. It's in the author's notes, the last page. So I did look it up just to read it to everybody, because I do think it says a lot, in case people didn't read this part about the author. But the author herself truly is an amazing, obviously spent a lot of time within herself and reading and looking at, there's so many amazing quotes in this book. But it says, what she wrote is, it says, in the years since the coup, conflict in Afghanistan has claimed far too many lives. Those who survived plod forward, bearing scars and trauma. Nadia Anjuman, a poet murdered by her husband, left behind verses that are fusions of hurt and hope. The title of this book comes from her stirring work, The Night's Poetry. I hope I have done this sliver of history justice.
Wow. Thank you, Debbie. Beautiful. Yeah.
Wow.
Good.
Wow.
So thank you all. This is great.
And thank you, Lynda.
Wonderful to be with you all again. And we're going to get to see each other. Many of you will get to see in person in June, which is really going to be fun, right?
Yes, and Jackie just put again in the chat the books, and I encourage you to go to dpjcc.org to register for, if you want to do the online program or find out information just about the 3 books. And as always, we thank our friends of the Sterling Road Library for doing this with us, and especially really Lynda for taking the book and this, and really bringing it alive again. Especially like when people haven't read it, they read it a while ago, and then to just have such a wonderful rich discussion. We cannot thank you enough for the.
Of course, all of you participating really makes the whole conversation wonderful. Debbie, let me ask you something just as a point of interest. You're going to still send this Zoom out to everybody, or do they have to call you?
You have to register for us to send it to you. We don't keep the list month.
Oh.
So it's really, if you think you want the Zoom, go ahead and register. And if you end up not going on it, of course, you can send me a note and I'll send you the recording. But it is not an automatic that we will send it out.
Oh, okay. So if you're right, so if you want to continue on Zoom, you need to go ahead and register again, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, plan on coming and seeing us in person, which will be great in the library.
Exactly. Or if you're on vacation and you're tuning in from wherever you are, that's your Zoom option. So that's
right.
We are still.
What are do we know anything about the books that are in the future, June, July?
Okay.
August?
Okay.
I must say, I am reading the Personal Librarian. I'm almost through with it. It is an amazing book. It's written incredibly, and the story also, since it's something real that happened.
Yes.
I am loving it. Thank
Great.
you so much.
I love that advertisement. That's wonderful. Thank you, Dora. Okay, Margie, I guess the answer is all the books are listed. Jackie's going to send all the books to you.
They're also, I posted them in the chat twice.
And they're in the chat. They're in the chat.
Yes, thank you so much, Jack.
For sure. And Lynda, I found that website and I posted that for everybody too.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Kathy, I don't know if you caught that. It's now posted the website. You had asked about the list of characters, the website. Jackie went ahead and posted that. Okay, great. Okay.
And I just wanted to add something. Debbie.
Yes, Kathy, go ahead.
Debbie,
Okay, excuse me. If guys stop, hold the background noise. Kathy, go ahead.
Yes, there was a marvelous program several months ago that the JCC did, I think, in cooperation with Atlanta.
Yes.
And it was an interview with the two authors of our next book. And I just wondered, is there a link to YouTube for anybody to see that if they would like to?
That original program, it was funny, while we were on the Zoom, Atlanta happened to text me. So I will ask her if she still has the original, because the link that I had no longer works, because I did check that out when you had sent that original email. But I will ask her if she has a recording, and if she does, happy to either we can maybe make a link to that from our webpage that you can check it out, because it truly is, not only is it an amazing true story that she writes, but the way that she wrote it in conjunction with the other author is also a really interesting story. And because she wanted to be very real and felt that she wasn't the right voice to do that. So I think that part of the conversation that they had is really insightful and makes you look at the book in another way.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. Leslie, did you have something?
Leslie,
you got to unmute.
I want to know that since your next two books are dealing with libraries, when are we going to read Dewey, the Librarian Cat? I'm telling you, it's an amazing story. Amazing. And I just love it. And I would love to hear us discuss it.
That's cute. Okay. Thank you for that suggestion. And suggested by the biggest lover of cats I have ever known in my whole life. Okay. Thanks, Leslie. Okay.
I would like to thank both Debbie and Jack and Lynda, and whoever picks the books. And is it you, Debbie? Whoever picks the books, you have picked wonderful books. And
I have to give a lot of credit, by the way. Speaking of that, thank you for saying that, Eva. I have to give a lot of credit to Marilyn London. She is my reader par excellence. She does a lot of the selecting of the books along with me, and she's a wonderful partner in that. So a great reader and a great friend. Thank you, Marilyn. Right. Thanks, Eva, for bringing that up. Okay, everybody. So have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the remaining month of May and the beginning of June, and we'll see each other very soon.
Okay, thank you so
Lynda.
much for
Thank
picking
you.
up
Thank you.
the
Thank you
important
so much.
part.
Thank you.
Linda, thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.